Hello and welcome to the Daily Dose, the podcast where I, Joshua Haymes, bring you Christian, conservative, cultural commentary, and we apply the Word of God to the world around us. So this is our new daily show, and this is on our new YouTube channel, the Daily Dose. So you guys go subscribe there. That's going to help us out a lot. And now I'm going to be doing these shows. I'm going to be doing these shows daily here. Pastor Brooks, who does Reformation Red Pill with me, can't make every single show, but today we have the privilege of having Pastor Brooks, not in studio, but in his house.
But welcome. In spirit and virtually as well. Glad to be here, Pastor Brooks of Pilgrim Hill Reformed Baptist Church. What did I say? Whoa. I was just reading about Ortland's talking about baptism, so that's where I went with that. Okay. You know who I am, probably. So we'll see how much I can get with this. I may have to provide some cover for my wife, who's going to take one of our teenagers to their job in just a few moments. But here I am for now.
Okay, well, we are glad to have you. I'm glad to have you because today we are going to be commenting on a video that just came out yesterday. It's David French and Jordan Peterson discussing toxic masculinity and how
I hadn't even heard that they did this, so I'm actually quite intrigued to see what it's all about.
Yeah, whenever I saw the thumbnail, I thought to myself, "These are not our guys. these are not our guys." Yes, Jordan Peterson has done some definitely some helpful things. He has said some helpful things. He's put forward some helpful ideas. But ultimately, and what I put in the thumbnail was we've got two Christless conservatives who are discussing masculinity. And the problem is that the solution to our masculine problems, our problems with manhood and masculinity in our society, the way I see it is the solution is God. The solution is his word. The solution is obedience to the scriptures. And when you've got two men, and it's interesting, Jordan Peterson is very obviously in the Christless conservative camp, but then you've got David French, who should be in the Christ-filled conservative camp, but for whatever reason,
I think that's like for me. I don't know this man's soul. I don't know the man, but certainly some of the fruit has been more than suspicious as of late. And again, we'll see what angle he takes here, but it's
and so for what it seems like he's been captured by progressive ideology. I mean, he's writing for the New York Times. What do you have to, what do you have to compromise to write for the New York Times?
To be in good standing there, yeah. Well, and also Rigney this last week did that piece where part of it was saying how he wishes that 2018 David French could have a word with 2025 David French, where French himself said we should live not by lies, and we should not call men women, even if they want us to. And now he does the same thing. And so that's where you start to obviously undermine your credibility. And that is a very non-masculine thing to do, to refuse to speak frankly, or to at least explain why the hard shift came from, rather than just kind of capitulating to the zeitgeist.
That's exactly right. I was just reading an article from David French back from 2018, where he made it very clear that he would not use the pronouns. Not only, he was standing firm on one of the issues that were it was so important, so foundational, and here we are, just a few years later, and he's using the pronouns, he's using the new names, all that kind of stuff, and so
the newspeak,
Yeah, exactly. And so let's jump in to see how what is effectively two, we would call them modern liberals. I mean, there are classical liberals is how they would want to be called, even though that label doesn't even really fit. But that's what they want to be, classical liberals. Well, David French wants to be called the only true conservative in the United States, the only true conservative Christian in the United States who stands by his principles.
That's the one who will save conservatism by voting for Harris.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And so, but ultimately, you've got two men who refuse to apply the word of God to politics, and really to politics in particular. And so that's why I have it as Christless conservatives who are commenting on toxic masculinity. So let's jump in to the actual interview itself here. Let me pull this up here. And Pastor Brooks, you just say when to pause whenever you've got something to say.
Sure.
Hello, everybody. So a small miracle occurred at the end of May this year. The New York Times wrote a piece that featured me that was positive, or at least mostly positive, and it was entitled "The Democrats' $20 Million Man Problem." It was written by journalist David French, and David had written a couple of pieces about me, and some positive and some less so, and I thought it would be very interesting to talk to him about the Democrats' $20 million man problem. Now, we ranged much more widely than merely that, but that's the focus of the conversation, so join us for that. I felt that the Democrats' investment of $20 million to solve their problem with men was money spent so absurdly badly that it was a kind of staggering miracle. And I thought we could have a conversation about all of that, because you're obviously concerned about the Democrats' man problem, but more deeply, you have the sense, not to put words in your mouth, that something is amiss on the masculine front, and you're also at odds and ends, let's say, about who men should turn to.
Right. Well, let me just start off with the way that I started off that piece. And there's a very memorable moment for me, and it was not the only time that something like this has occurred, because I've been writing and talking about the challenges that men, and particularly young men, are facing for a long time. I mean, I was sort of standing there jumping up and down going, young men are in trouble, young men are in crisis for a long time. And around 16, 17, 18, I began to encounter a lot of young men who were saying that you had really impacted their lives for the better. And I began with a vignette about a former Marine who was driving me somewhere and started talking about how you had really changed his life. I believe the phrase he used was saved his life. And I was really curious about that. And so I asked him how that happened. And he was talking about when he got out of the service. And this is something as a veteran that I have seen with a lot of soldiers, sailors, Marines. When you leave the service, one of the things that you lose is your sense of daily purpose, especially if you've deployed and you've been downrange. You have an incredible sense of purpose, even though it's very, very stressful. It's very, very difficult. It's very, very scary. But you have this real purpose. And you come home and you leave the military and you begin to lack purpose. You lack direction. And you know where that takes people. It takes people into bad places. And he talked about, this must have been right after your book, 12 Rules came out. And he talked about reading that book and how just that very simple thing of the making of your bed and the adjustment of how he viewed the world and the intentional acts of service or kindness to other people really kind of was like a reboot for him. And that always stuck with me. And it stuck with me for two reasons, Jordan. Reason number one was just the sheer power of somebody caring. Okay. And this is something that's a huge problem. So many young men, as you know, I'm not going to tell you anything about young men you don't already know, but so many young men do not have fathers. They do not have male role models. And so the fact that a man cares and wants to see them succeed and wants to see them succeed in the right way is incredibly important. And then the other thing that really stood out was the way in which your communications with them were not trite self-help, although you had some basic rules, but you really dove deeply into the philosophical reasons and even the religious or scriptural reasons why you articulated these points. And so two things were happening at once. You were saying, I care, and you were giving a sophisticated enough approach that said that I'm not patronizing you. I'm treating you like an adult. And I think those two things at once was kind of, for lack of a better term, like the alchemy or the magic of the moment. Because, and as I wrote, a lot of people on the other side of the cultural spectrum the last thing they were doing was delivering a message that said, I care. In many ways, it seemed as if people were celebrating the demise of men or denying the demise of men or beginning to characterize traditional masculinity as inherently toxic or inherently problematic. And what that told a lot of young men was not, well, you have a problem, which a lot of young men knew. I do have a problem, failing to succeed at school, failing to get some real purpose. And instead was telling these young men, you are the problem, which is a totally different thing, which is saying there's something wrong with you. And that was, I think, an extremely destructive development in the culture. Now, it was unevenly applied. Like during the sort of the rise of the so-called manosphere, I was living in rural and suburban Tennessee, and you didn't see that really attack on young men as much. But there are other places in other parts of the country where that was very much a present reality in a lot of young men's lives. And so you have a lot of young men who are struggling. You have a lot who are fatherless. You have a lot who lack male mentors. And then you had this one side of this sort of cultural divide saying there's something wrong with you. There's something inherently wrong with what you want to do, what you want to be, what your goals are, your dreams are, your aspirations. And somebody else says, no, I care about you. I want you to succeed. I want you to feel meaning. I want you to feel purpose. In that situation, like that message is like encountering an oasis in a desert.
So real quickly, David French here is speaking to, the kind of the rise of Jordan Peterson in a sense, and I relate a lot to that because I remember whenever I was first encountered Jordan Peterson was the Joe Rogan podcast. I saw some clips before, but my friend sent me this. I listened to the entire episode, like several hours of Jordan Peterson talking, and he really it seemed like he really knew what time it was on so many different issues, and it was so encouraging to see somebody who's not even that was really at the beginning of seemingly at the beginning of his journey and exploration into the Christian faith as well. And so, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that he hit on that really is profound is he understood more than so many Christians that the creation mandate was still enacted.
Yes.
That men need to feel a sense of dignity in the work that they're doing. And that has gotten so flattened in the church, where what has the gospel to do with 9 to 5 construction work? We just need to get people saved. That's what the gospel is, making sure people get to heaven, when it's being united to the second Adam, the new Adam, who now empowers you by his Spirit to fulfill the original mandate Adam was given in the garden, to glorify and redeem the world around him. And so he was speaking more profoundly theological, almost accidentally, because he just understood the way the world worked with wisdom than people were getting from even pastors often.
That's right. Yeah, it's like he had some of those Issacharian instincts to know what time it was, but he lacked, unfortunately. So you're right. It's almost like he is a proverbial person, like someone who understands the Proverbs, right? And who can take the earthy wisdom in the Proverbs and just apply it in real life. And if you do
Confucius.
Yeah, exactly. You will be blessed to some degree. Right. But the problem is, as I said at the top of the episode, that the underlying problem is an anthropological problem, that we are born in sin and we are separated from our Savior. And if you don't have that piece, you can apply a lot of really earthy, like foundational, exceptional wisdom that can help you really help pull men out of like really deep, dark places, but it can't give them the ultimate solution. Like the ultimate peace and joy that they're looking for can truly only be found in Christ. Anyway, so Jordan Peterson is like, I still hold out hope for him. I see him almost like as a C.S. Lewis figure. It seems like he's coming to Christ against his will in a sense.
Well, I would say one of the great ironies about Peterson, especially with his voice among men and his masculine insights, is how unmasculine he has been in his refusal to commit himself to a position.
Yes.
And that is very not masculine to say, I will not, I want to live in obscurity. And when you try to pin me down, I will not tell you what I think about that, which is problematic when you are a conveyor of truth. What is your epistemology? Where are you grounding these things in? And so I appreciate him, but I have found that to be very suspicious. And And
Jung is his epistemology. It seems
of course.
But let's keep going and let's see how Dr. Peterson responds here.
So let me ask you some questions about that. I guess the first question I have is, why personally?
Before we jump in, guys, we got 250 people watching. Most of you guys are on X. This is a brand new YouTube channel. You guys can make a huge difference for us if you just go click off of X. I put the link in the comments to this video. So you just got to click the link and watch on YouTube. That will help us out a ton. We're trying to get this thing going. So if you want to really help us out, it's a little something you can do is go over to YouTube and like the video and watch over there. Thanks, guys.
Why is this an issue for you? And I want to tangle that up with a different question though, because there's a political element to this, obviously. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You wrote that the Democrats had a $20 million man problem. So although it's not exactly a political problem, it's actually a philosophical problem, or it's a spiritual problem. It's deeper than the political. It's just manifesting itself in the political. But I want to address two things. The first question I want to address is, why is this an issue for you? And then let's sort out some of the political issues before we proceed in the conversation.
Well, it's an issue for me for multiple reasons. One, I'm a father of a son. I have a 24-year-old son. And I have seen with my own eyes, in that peer group that he has, how many young men in that peer group, spend a period of time kind of wandering in the wilderness, if that makes sense. I've seen, you can't be a father of a son in this era and have not seen the struggles that so many young men have had. And so one of the things is I want to be a good mentor to my son. I want to love my son well. And when you try to love your own son well, you cannot help but enter this larger world of what's happening with young men in general. And so that was right in front of my face, watching his peer group come of age and the struggles that many people in his peer group had. And so that was very direct and personal. Then the next personal layer was I'm also a veteran. And so I served in the Army as a JAG officer, an Army lawyer. I deployed to Iraq during the surge in 07-08. And because I joined later in life, I joined the Army later in life. I was the second oldest officer on the base behind our commander. But that gave me an actual opportunity to serve in a mentoring capacity for some of these much younger soldiers. And I could see their struggles, and I could see their questions about the world and the life after the military. And then the third thing is, I'm very concerned about American culture more broadly. The way in which an increasing number of people feel a sense of despair and anxiety and hopelessness, that we've seen this rise of deaths of despair. And then when you dig into it, who is dying the deaths of despair? Well, yes, there are women, married and single, who are, but by and large, it's disproportionately single men, either never married or divorced men. And there's this real sense of a lack of community and connection. And then you layer on top of this, and again, this is all stuff you're very familiar with. You have the declining number of friendships amongst young men in particular, and men in particular. And it's all adding up to an immense amount of human suffering. It's adding up to pain, loss, anguish. At the very edges, it's adding up to suicide and suicidal attempts. And so we have a society and a culture where millions upon millions of people are feeling this sense of anguish. And if you don't have a heart for that, like if that doesn't touch your heart, just leave aside the politics. I would say, hey guys, if that isn't touching your heart, take another look at this, right? And then the other thing, the political aspect, I truly believe, and there's really, a lot to back this up, that a lot of our political dysfunction is downstream from our personal and cultural sense of a lack of belonging in our communities and our families and amongst friends. And so I really do feel like a lot of the things that are ripping America apart will begin to ease if we can deal with this loneliness, this alienization, this lack of belonging. And so even if you're just cold-blooded about it, like even if you're like, well, I just want American politics to be less dysfunctional, America to be less divided, just dealing with the issue that is besetting, again, particularly young men, is an imperative. So it's an imperative morally, it's an imperative culturally, it's an imperative politically, and if you have an ounce of love in your heart for people, it's just an imperative spiritually. I have been.
Yeah, let's pause it here, because this is really, I think, telling and important for how even perhaps the shift that he's undergone, where the big idea is to make people feel like they belong now.
Yeah,
like that is, now there's so much truth to that. Obviously, we were created for relationship. This is a Trinitarian world. It's enchanted by the Trinity under every rock, for sure. Absolutely. But if that rises as the ultimate thing, is making people feel getting rid of existential despair by not feeling included in something, then you will make every concession then in the book that you're required to make people feel included. And so that might be off topic, but I do think that was it's one of those things where there's a little bit of it's what he said is true, but truth then can go wonky if we don't stick with the truth.
Yeah, and it also just rings hollow whenever you're talking about how much you need to care about the demise of masculinity and this problem with men, and your solution is to, like, your political solution is to vote for a candidate that and a party platform that absolutely despises men. Like, right. to throw your support behind Kamala Harris, who is like the apotheosis of the radical, progressive, liberal agenda that hates men, that's totally pro-feminist, that, like, to publicly throw your support behind her, just, I mean, everything you just said rings hollow in light of that, Right. Yeah. Anyway, so we
but you can see how people get there. Again, when this shift happens, this becomes the great thing. And so,
right.
Anyway,
no, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That shift where it's all about making people feel something. Like, you need to make them feel happy thoughts. Make them think happy thoughts. Make them feel nice. Rather than like old David French used to believe, rather than sticking to the truth. Yeah.
Yeah. And something interesting he said there was, even if you're cold-blooded about it, which means even if you're kind of disconnected and you're just trying to be pragmatic, how do I do this? The way that people truly find belonging is being reconciled to God through Christ and then engrafted into the church. That is that longing, how we actually get that. The other way will only lead more to despair if we applaud lies
and exactly right.
impulses. Yeah.
Christian evangelical conservative my entire life. I voted for Kamala Harris, the first Democrat I voted for in national election in my life. So I have been a conservative. I was a delegate to the 2012 Republican convention. So yeah, I've been a Christian conservative my entire life, and have volunteered for Republican campaigns. In 1988, joined the College Republicans at my small Christian college that I attended in Nashville. And Very different experience from my law school, which was very liberal. My small Christian college was super conservative, and it was so conservative that we realized as college Republicans that we had no more votes to get for George H.W. Bush over Dukakis. But yeah, I've been a conservative and my entire life, and a Republican. I'm not a Republican anymore, but I've been a Republican most of my adult life.
You have written for The Atlantic and for the New York Times. Why do they allow you to write for them?
Well,
yeah, okay. Thank you for articulating that question, Dr. Peterson. Why do they allow you to write for them? And frankly, unless you are just a punching bag for them, that's the only reason they should allow you, like the New York Times, as it currently exists. Unless you're just like the in-house punching bag that they all can just disagree with, like a token like conservative. Like there's really no reason that they would allow they wouldn't. They just simply wouldn't allow a true conservative Christian to write for them. They just won't. They won't allow that.
Well, and I also think it comes down to fundamentally, what does it mean to be a conservative? If we're not conserving our basic values and yeah. So
no, exactly.
Well, they were actually looking for a pro-life person when they were trying to hire a new columnist, actually looking for somebody who was conservative and somebody who had, I'm also a veteran. I don't believe there were any columnists who were veterans. I'm also a lawyer. I don't believe at the time of my hiring that there were any other columnists who were lawyers. I'm a constitutional lawyer. So, I think that's the overall mix, but, you'd have to ask my boss as to why. But I was very pleasantly surprised, I'll be honest with you, when I got the job offer. It was definitely not something I was seeking out, but it came to me, and I was very grateful and thankful, and I've had a really good experience there.
Getting the most out of life means being prepared for whatever comes your way. But many of us don't realize that a simple will
No, sir.
There, and then you sorted out 3 reasons that you're concerned. Because you have a son, and then you talked about what you saw in his circle of friends. Because you're a veteran and you played a mentorship role there, and then because you're concerned with broad cultural issues. Let's start with the personal. I want to tell you a story about my son when he was about 13. So I reviewed his report card, and it wasn't stellar, let's say, although it was fine, but it wasn't stellar. And so I asked him about that, and he said, "Well, Dad, I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing really well for a boy."
Right.
And I thought, I'd never heard him say anything like that. And it was certainly nothing that he had picked up at home. And it was quite striking to me because for him, that was just matter of fact. And of course, that's a deep rabbit hole, because when your son comes to you and says, "I'm doing pretty good for a boy," if you have any sense, the first thing you think is, where the hell did that come from? And so seriously, because now that's an implicit presupposition that the boys underperform the girls. That was certainly not a presupposition when I was his age. And it wasn't anything that was appropriate for him, because there's nothing wrong with his mind or his conscientiousness. And so, I've observed that boys the school system is not set up for them in the least. The vast majority of teachers are not only female, but infantilizing female and radically left. Boys' play preferences are denigrated. They're required to sit for hours at a time, which is not in keeping with their nature, especially if they're active, in which case they get diagnosed with ADHD and get put on methylphenidate, which suppresses play behavior as one of its primary functions. And then they're told that competitive games are wrong because we should all cooperate, by people who are too stupid to notice that competitive games are cooperative because everybody's playing by the same rules. And then they're told that boys' ambition is pathological, and that the patriarchy and marriage, for that matter, is an oppressive institution. And if they manage to escape from all that, then they're told that the activities of males are destroying the planet.
So effectively here, this is just a full-on repudiation of feminism, how feminism has infected, virtually every institution in our society, but in particular, education. How now our education is essentially a feminist endeavor almost entirely. Like Dr. Peterson just laid out there, every element of the educational system is now geared towards making, culling young boys and making them into girls. Right. Not, it used to be.
Yeah, it's Lewis, right? You remove the organ and then bid the geldings be fruitful.
No, that's exactly right.
It is the removing of the masculine organ in so many ways.
Yeah, and he's speaking to actually a truly insidious problem in our modern educational landscape, and that really is like the emasculization, if that's a word, of young boys.
Well, and it really is profound what he said again about how the whole system is set up that doesn't cut with the grain of their nature. Boys weren't created by God to sit still for hours on end. And so when that becomes the standard, how well you do that as to whether or not you are successful, well, we can see how things go wonky all over the place. Anyways.
No, that's exactly. And here in this interview, it's so interesting because I fundamentally oppose the project of classical liberalism, which is what Dr. Peterson would identify himself as a classical liberal. And I also oppose what David French is trying to do, which he's just a liberal as well. He wouldn't call himself that. He calls himself, like I said, the only true conservative, but he is fundamentally liberal. He was arguing with Paul Miller in the book, the Religion for American Greatness, that drag queen story hour is just one of the inevitable things we have to put up with in a free country. That it's the blessings of freedom.
Right.
And so I definitely disagree with both of them, but that doesn't negate the fact that Dr. Peterson is incredibly insightful on a lot of these issues.
Absolutely.
That he really can provide a very helpful diagnosis oftentimes. But he's not going to prescribe the right medication.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much a comprehensive evil queen pathology as far as I'm concerned. And it's not bloody wells. Then you add to that, there's an additional twist too, which we should delve into. It's a universal cultural problem to make adults out of juvenile males. That's why there are initiation rites in so many cultures. And you have to create a responsible man. And the reason for that is that it's a hell of a lot easier to be irresponsible and immature than it is to be responsible and mature. And
for men and women. For men and women, yeah.
Right. Well, the thing about women is once they have an infant...
Even there, that's we don't want to flatten that. Like the laziness is a peculiarly masculine temptation.
Yes.
And so we want to keep our categories clear. But again, the impulse there is interesting, right? To try to make sure that we, of course, women can be irresponsible, but the world goes south when men refuse to take responsibility, because that is a uniquely masculine calling.
Correct, and it's that impulse. I mean, it's a feminist egalitarian impulse that says, "Oh, men and women, men. We can't just talk about one set of issues. Right. We've got to flat, like you said, we've got to flatten everything." But one quick comment on that is that the Bible is not uncomfortable with labeling, giving particular direction to men and women with their particular temptations, particularly masculine temptations, as you were saying, Pastor Brooks, about laziness, and particular feminine temptations like gossip and things like that. The Bible isn't shy about that, right? God has made us different, and because David French is first and foremost a liberal and a feminist and an egalitarian, and I mean these like in technical senses, like he's just like his worldview.
Right. These aren't jabs. Like, this is descriptors of where he's coming from.
Yeah. That's these are legitimate descriptors of where he's coming from. Exactly. Yeah. He can't help but throw that in there. I can't be seen on this podcast just speaking to the sins of men, or just speaking to problems that women might have. Right. You've got to hit that leveling button. You've got to hit that egalitarian. You got to hit that egal button.
Right.
Yeah.
That kind of catalyzes the maturity, and maybe their nature has a proclivity to initiate women a little more dramatically than it initiates men. So the fundamental problem that cultures face is how to make men out of boys and how to stop young women from getting pregnant out of wedlock. That's the anthropological evidence. And so the boys face I think, a virtual conspiracy of demoralization. And that seems to me to be, well, that's underneath the political, but the Democrats have been playing that hand madly for, I'd say, 4 generations. And now they're reaping what they sowed.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Let me go kind of step by step, and let me begin with one thing that I think you articulated right off the top, that is, I think, a very important disconnect that is happening. So a lot of this articulation you hear from the extreme left, and you laid out the way there are folks on the extreme left who just comprehensively demolish masculinity. Now, I'd say most boys have not been exposed to that in school. That might be you might see that in some hyper progressive prep schools or whatever, but some degree of that, some element of that is coming and leaking through and permeating through a lot of American culture. And one of the things that I have seen is that a lot of the people, when we talk about this, when we raise this issue, a lot of people in the commentary class and the academic class immediately denigrate a lot of the evidence about the struggles of young men and boys, because they don't see in their milieu, they don't see men struggling, because they're in places where it might be, say, elite academia or high-level corporate work, or in the military or government, where men are still at the tip of the spear, at the apex of kind of American commercial and political and economic achievement. Men are still doing quite well. It's the big, giant number of people who are not in that sort of tip of the spear who are really struggling. And because so many of us live in these bubbles.
And real quick, David French would decry that almost certainly as some sort of sexism in the workplace or something like that. But he's just describing the bell curve. Like this is how God made the world. The most aggressive, the most ingenuitive men or people on the planet are going to be men. They're going to be on the tip of the bell curve. That's just the way that God made the world. And it's not a problem, right? The left wants to make that into a problem, but God has put that into the world for a reason. He's called men to lead. He's called men to provide. He's called men to protect. And so he actually put in them the necessary qualities to do that, and that's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't see it at all. They don't see it at all. And this is something that I think is endemic in our commentariat, and that is a lot of our commentariat lives and eats and breathes a very rarefied cultural air, and they don't have any real world sense of the way that people are living their lives and the struggles they're facing outside of that milieu. And so when you walk into and you start talking about how these young men are struggling, a lot of times you get I've been in these rooms where people immediately dismiss you. Well, a disproportionate number of men are CEOs, a disproportionate number of men are in Congress, you name it. And I'm like, I'm not talking about the tip of the spear here. I'm talking about millions upon millions of people, regular Americans who are struggling. And in many ways, they're not struggling because of you, but are you helping or are you hurting? And I can tell you right now, if you're telling men that, for example, traditional masculinity ideology is inherently toxic, you're hurting. You're not helping. And I tend to have an explanation of the struggles of young men that's rooted in a lot more than ideology and politics. It's rooted in changing economies and changing technologies. A lot of things changed in a way that left men in a position where they would often feel like, I'm not as necessary, I'm not as needed as I was. A lot of the raw strength, that raw physical strength, for example, that men have.
So he's saying that if you're saying that traditional masculinity is a problem, then you're the problem, essentially. But how traditional do we want to get? That's the question. And we did our whole episode on Reformation Red Pill about biblical patriarchy. It seems to me that on the trajectory that David French is on, the idea that a husband and father is called to like rule his household well, to sacrificially love his wife and family, but to actually rule his household and to do so in accordance with the scriptures, it seems to me that would be off limits, right? That's archaic. That's something or other. But if we want to actually speak to men, if we want to if we want to fix this masculinity problem, then we've got to be unashamed about going back to the scriptures and what it says. We can't you can't impulsively every time someone talks about masculine problems say, and feminine problems too. We need to be able to speak like the scripture speaks, and speak the words of scripture without getting embarrassed or squishy or anything like that.
Yeah.
Became less and less important to be a part of a vibrant economy. Military is shrinking. The U.S. military is much smaller right now than it was at the height of the Cold War. A lot of these things created dynamics where men felt less needed. And then you have another part of this cultural world that then jumps on men who are feeling less needed, who are not elite, regular everyday folks who are just trying to do their best and are coming in and saying, well, a lot of the things that you feel or a lot of the way that you are is just bad and wrong. And so that created this environment in the sense where I'm struggling and an awful lot of people don't care. And that, I feel like, is just a giant cultural disaster that unfolded. And now it's not unfolding everywhere the same. That litany of things that you said about what people on the far left think and did, like my son and his peers, they never heard any of that in rural Middle Tennessee. That is not their experience in rural Middle Tennessee. But I will say that all the technological changes and the changes to career and the changes to all these other big cultural changes absolutely impact us everywhere. And so young men are facing a world, even if they're in a very sort of man-friendly part of the country, which rural Tennessee is, they're still walking into an economy and they're still walking into a culture that has been through a lot, generations of upheaval. And in that circumstance, you really have to intentionally lean in to mentor young men into virtuous masculinity. It doesn't happen by osmosis. It doesn't happen by inertia. It happens through intention. And so that's where, when I was writing my piece that you reached out, when you're in your book, 12 Rules is a lot about intention, like living an intentional life and thinking things through and having an approach and having a purpose. And that's exactly how you cultivate virtuous masculinity is you're living a life of intention. It's not happening by osmosis. It's not happening by inertia. And in fact, a lot of the cultural inertia was destructive, not constructive. And so creating I think it was absolutely vitally necessary to create a kind of counterculture to that was like, hey, young men, we love you. We care about you. We want you to succeed. And I think that's one of the reasons why you often see a lot of emotion spring up in men when they do encounter somebody, whether it's somebody who wrote a book or delivered a speech that finally says to them that very simple message, that's what they hear. I care for you. I want you to succeed. I'm here. I'm going to help you do it. And the best people who do this do it. I want you to succeed in the right way. The worst voices are just go get what's yours, young man. That's the toxic message that indulges the worst elements of our nature. The message that says that here, train you up in a way that is much more akin to, the Kipling poem If, than sort of any kind of like blind ambition or greed or sexual conquest or sexual exploitation. But if you're building people in virtuous masculinity, I think that's the oasis in the desert. Whereas that toxic, go get what's yours, sexual prowess, financial accomplishment is the be all end all. That's the mirage. That's the illusion. And that just leads them deeper into the desert.
Well, we should talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think part of this too, again, in the context of their conversation, all that's well and good. But as Christians, we know that's all just entirely surface. 100%. What is needed is repentance. Repentance. Now that doesn't mean there aren't things stacked against us, but we aren't primarily victims in need of a shoulder rub. We are primarily sinners in need of repenting, and then being built up again by Christ, being built into a true man through Christ, understanding that you're not meant to just hack the system so that you feel fulfilled. You are called by God with unbelievable dignity to glorify God in all you do as his representative here on earth. And so again, it's all fine as far as it goes in the context of this conversation, but as Christians, we know it must go much deeper. Men must be called to die so that they could be raised to new life in Christ and empowered by his Spirit to not just become a little more virtuous, but to live into this new creation nature they have in Christ now. That's
right. And if you're the Christian conservative who's coming on this gigantic platform, you would think you would take advantage of that to take out off the surface level truth that basically everyone, even remotely on the right, agrees with, and actually get to the root of the matter, like you're saying.
Yeah, and part of me wants to say, well, I get it. He's coming on the Daily Wire, and this is the context of the conversation. But if we do think the gospel is actually the truth about the entire world, and we're trying to diagnose and then offer correctives, it's kind of hard to not bring that into the conversation because, I mean, all this is doing is just, anyways.
Absolutely.
From a psychological perspective, because there are real reasons why that more psychopathic end of the so-called manosphere has its attractiveness.
You know what happens every summer at Calations Professional Rush?
Like So back in 2016...
And I'll have to jump here in just a minute, Josh.
My objection to my liberal government's utter stupidity launched me into the public eye. I told the Senate and the public in general that this conspiracy, so to speak, to weaken men would produce a very toxic and fascist-like backlash. Now, one of the things that, man, I admire greatly, the psychologist Carl Jung pointed out, was that you can be socialized into a conformist persona. And the way out of that is through the dark side, so to speak, to incorporate elements of the psyche that have been set to the side in the domestication effort. Hyper-domesticated young men are going to find hyper-aggressive young men attractive as role models. And the reason for that is they need that aggression. And the fact that that's attractive is just an indication of how much demoralization has taken place.
Well, I also think that's an eternal battle. I put it this way. Somebody has asked me, who are the best men and the worst men that you've encountered? And the answer is the same: football coaches. Some of the best men I've ever encountered are football coaches who have been able to socialize young men and take this energy, this drive, this aggression, and create it into and turn it into a brotherhood, turn it into a community, turn it into a fellowship that is pouring into fighting for each other the right way. And so I've seen a football coach be incredibly instrumental in a young man's life by taking all of that that's in them, all that stew that's in them, and molding it and channeling them and turning them into tremendous citizens and turning them into good teammates and good friends. And you will meet so many former football players who will say the person who changed my life as much or more than my father, depending on the relationship with their father, was their football coach. And then you will find men who will say one of the most malignant influences in my entire life was my football coach, because he taught me to hurt people. He taught me to inflict pain. He told me that rage and aggression were my friend. I should cultivate them and burn, and I've actually seen different kinds of coaches. And so I would say that, one of the interesting realities of life is that and this goes all way back. If you go back to June 6th, 1944, on Normandy Beach, you had two different kinds of young male acculturation confronting each other on that pivotal day in world history, where you had a generation of youth acculturated into cruelty, into viciousness. And yes, they were very lethal, and they were very well trained, and they were very proficient in the profession of arms, which caused a lot of people to admire them, but they were cruel and they were vicious while they were lethal. And then on the other side, you had the forces of American and British democracy and Canadian democracy as well. One of the beaches was Canadian, right? So you had these coming across the channel. They weren't perfect people and they weren't perfect cultures, but these young men were acculturated to use their sense of their courage and their aggression to defeat cruelty, to protect the weak, to protect the vulnerable. And
one of the things I can't help but notice here is that this is this is a classic example of what the conversation that's been going on the right now about the post-war consensus and how everything goes back to World War II because for so many people, particularly liberals, because this is the founding it's like the founding myth of America now, instead of being founded on Christ, His word, and the principles of Scripture. Now, essentially, America was remade at World War II with the great Satan being Hitler and all the American mythos basically reformed out of that. And so it seems this is David French's like very academic way to call anyone to the right of him Nazis. That's what he's getting at right now. He's talking about like this this aggression that comes up and it's such a tired kind of go-to slur for anyone, and he's done this before. Anyone that is politically to my right is dangerous, and his and the perpetual temptation is to snuggle up to people on the left, kid gloves to my left, and gloves off to my right, and always the key there is World War II and calling them Nazis. Like I don't know why you would buy into that framing. I get it. I mean, this is the milieu that we've been swimming in for so long, but this seems like the buttoned up way to just call anyone to my right a Nazi, basically.
And it is striking to me how that virtuous masculinity, that virtuous courage and aggression so comprehensively triumphed in World War II. I'm reading this book right now about the fall of Berlin. And this is a great lesson in why you shun cruelty and you exhibit compassion. At the very end of the war, when Nazi Germany was collapsing, people were falling all over themselves to come to the American side and to escape the Soviet side. And so this was something where not only by our valor did we win the war, our compassion also helped us win the war. And that's when I'm looking at this little angel and devil on the young man's shoulder. I've often think of the bad coach and the good coach, or at the most extreme, and I don't know, gosh, I'm a middle-aged man, so I guess I always have to talk about World War II at some point in it. At the extremes, you have the pure evil of fascism and communism and the virtuous valor of a democracy awakened. And these are the angels and devils that are always on the shoulder of young men here. And look, I know that there are parallels with women, but we're talking about men. These are the angels and devils that are on young men's shoulders. And you're exactly right. A lot of young men will be drawn to that devilish side because not only does it feel rewarding and strong, it's easier. It's easier in so many ways because you don't engage in self-discipline. You don't check yourself. You don't engage in kindness because kindness carries a cost. And so it's the easier path to indulge that unmitigated, unbridled aggression and ambition. It is the harder path to temper that aggression and ambition with courage and compassion. And so I think that's the eternal struggle, and it manifests itself in different eras in different ways.
So I've been spending some time considering the archetypal image of the shepherd in the biblical writings.
Yeah.
And
before you go, I know you got to go in here in just a second. I would like to ask you, Pastor Brooks, given that in the thumbnail I said that these are not our guys, not the men for the job, who are some men today that you would look to, that you would point other men to as as exemplars, as examples to follow into, particularly men, whether it's pastors or commentators, men who are understand the times and who are encouraging men to pursue righteous, biblical, godly masculinity. Who are some voices that you would say?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I'd probably point to is some dead men. One literally over here, over my shoulder, Stonewall Jackson. If you know me, you know that I love the man, and it's for this very reason. He is a remarkable portrait of true biblical masculinity, and so I'd encourage folks to read Rebel Yell. It is so wonderful. I see Pastor Rich Lusk in that capacity. He is so wise. I've never seen him emotionally rattled. He engages with clarity, with charity, with precision. And he is wonderfully self-forgetful. He is never posturing or trying to. So I read anything by Rich Lusk. Joe Rigney as well, I think is a wonderful example of this. I'd point to my grandpa George. Also, you probably don't have the same access, but I look up to him. Obviously, Pastor Wilson is someone I hold in high regard as well in that capacity. And I mean, I'm just riffing, but those are a few that come to mind.
That's great. Yeah, and Michael Foster was also a great example today as well. Just kind of that earthy, godly man that actually, that also comments on kind of the modern problems within masculinity or within our culture as it relates to masculinity. And in particular, it's so accessible. His book, It's Good to Be a Man, is so accessible and so good. It really it lays out the problem.
Yeah, he really does have uncommon wisdom on these things. But I would encourage guys who are watching this, just survey your church and what's a guy whose life you would want to model, and it probably isn't going to be flashy, and that's part of the appeal. He just takes care of his business and perhaps works with his hand. He loves his wife well, and man, to take some initiative to say, hey, I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee and just learn from you a little bit. One that honors elders in the midst. That's don't chat GPT your questions. Ask the guy in church who's just faithfully doing his thing. And then two, you will get gritty wisdom. It's easy for men to get red pilled and realize, holy crap, everything has been stacked against us. I've been lied about, and I'm the victim. And then to just kind of pout for a while and to wait around for a mentor to find you. No, you need to go pursue it. I have heard multiple guys who can never land at a church lamenting how they weren't pursued or how their needs weren't met. No, you need to pursue and use words to say, hey, I would like to learn from you. Is there a context we could do that in?
That's good.
So, yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
I do have to jump, but yeah, glad to join you for a bit here.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on, Pastor Brooks, and we'll be seeing more of you, of course.
Yeah. God bless you. Bye, guys.
All right, guys, we're going to watch a little bit more. I'm trying to keep these episodes closer to an hour. So we'll go a little bit longer. I'll comment a little more. It's hard. I listened to most of the interview on like 3 times speed to see, and it's not the best interview, but I just couldn't pass up the reality. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to bring in, some commentary on the problems within masculinity and the actual solutions for these problems from a distinctly reformed, or dark roast reformed, as we say at Reformation Red Pill, perspective, and kind of take it out of squishy lib territory and put it in our territory. So anyway, we'll watch a little bit longer, and you guys can leave me some comments if you guys want me to keep going. I'll consider it. But this is kind of a tough interview to watch. I can't listen to David French, his voice, for that long. You know what I mean? So that's why it's on 1.5 speed. So let's just we'll jump back in and see how long we get.
Of course, so Moses was a shepherd and David was a shepherd and Christ is a shepherd, metaphorically. So the question is, why the image of the shepherd? And you put your finger on it in the discussion that you just brought forward. So in pastoral times, especially in the Middle East, being a shepherd was actually it was a demanding and dangerous job, like Like all jobs were demanding and dangerous in those
Nothing
times.
easy about it. Yeah,
No.
absolutely.
Well, so the shepherd had to fight off wolves and lions, and he had to take care of himself in the wilderness. So just right there, that's hard. But then the crucial issue is that monstrous capacity to fight off the predators and even to some degree to fend for yourself was turned into service to the most vulnerable. That's why the protection of the lamb is such a numinous image in the Western cultural tradition, especially at the biblical level, because all that aggression, I mean, you touched on this, say, with regard to valor in World War II, all that capacity for aggression, and teamwork aggression for that matter, is supposed to be subordinated to service to the most vulnerable. And so the shepherd is this amalgam of monstrous power and service to the most vulnerable, self-sacrificial service to the most vulnerable. Of course, that's a hallmark of Christianity itself and something that distinguishes it from all other theories of sovereignty, right? Because Christianity is very paradoxical and peculiar in that regard, that it defines sovereignty not as the aristocratic will to power, dominance and force, let's say, of pagan Rome, or even aristocratic Greece for that matter, but transmutes that into the capacity for stalwart and forthright behavior in service to the most vulnerable. And that means the highest serves the lowest, and that actually becomes a defining characteristic of what's highest, which is really quite a miracle of conceptual rearrangement. And so this kind of notion is part of what's been driving my discussions with men. I mean, much of what I've done on the public stage has been in response to my observation of the desperate situation of, well, young people, because you can't demoralize young men without devastating young women. You know, I don't know if you know this, but you know in the West now that more than 50% of women at the age of 30 have no children.
That is a devastating statistic. That is, I mean, we're getting close to the point where you don't recover from that. And that's why I'm commenting on this stuff, because the stakes are high. Culturally speaking, the stakes are really high. Like, my hope and prayer is that my son's generation and then his children's generation, my hope and prayer is that they're getting married at 18, 19, 20, 21, at the latest 22, and having lots of kids for the glory of God, because that's how we are called to. I mean, Pastor Brooks mentioned it just a few minutes ago, the dominion mandate. We were made to take dominion over this earth, over our little corner of the kingdom, and to be fruitful and multiply. Like, that's just part of like how God made us. That's part of it's wired into us. And now, because of, I mean, feminism, this is the fruit of liberalism, egalitarianism, feminism, all these ugly isms that have embedded themselves in our culture. We've got to overturn it, and we're not going to overturn. We're not going to tear down those high places of those isms that I just named, among others, Darwinism, right? There's many ugly isms out there. Those are the high places. Those are the replacement little g gods that have replaced the true religion of Christianity in American culture. Those are the American gods, okay? And if we do not take an axe to those idols, we're cooked. We're just cooked. But the good thing is we can take an axe to those idols. We can deconstruct those isms. In fact, we're getting to the point finally where people are able to, just normies are waking up to the problems with our modern society. There's a great book I'm reading right now called Why Liberalism Failed. And if you guys are looking for a good read, Patrick Deneen's Why Liberalism Failed is really good. He's got a new book that I haven't read that I plan on actually hoping to speed read this week, which is Regime Change, is the follow-up to that. But basically, he's arguing that all these problems that we're facing in modern society, all these isms that I just named, they are the fruit of liberalism. And all our problems are not because liberalism failed in a sense. It's because it succeeded. It's because the presuppositions of liberalism, namely that the individual is primary, and individual autonomy, total freedom in our choices is the highest virtue, is the supreme good, and choice has been unmoored, detached from duty. Liberty and duty have been detached. And anyway, I can go on a whole rabbit trail there. Highly recommend Why Liberalism Failed by Patrick Deneen. So that's really good. But bringing it full circle, yeah. If we don't start having babies, if we don't tear down these the gods of feminism, liberalism, egalitarianism, and start having babies and honoring Christ in all of life, yeah, we're cooked. So that's my whole project. That's why I do what I do.
More than 50%, right? Half of them will never have a child. And so on the one hand, we have the absolute radical pathological demoralization of young men. And then we have the insistence that although all that masculinity is toxic and patriarchal, that's precisely what young women should pursue. And so they pursue that, in some ways displacing young men, but more detrimentally for themselves, squandering their youth on service to the evil corporate world, bizarrely enough, given that it's a leftist trope, and the demolition of their, not only of their fertility, but the probability of their what participation in the long-term partnership of marriage. So, I mean, you can hardly imagine a more toxic brew than that. And how we got here is quite the bloody miracle.
Okay, real quick, we're going to hear from our sponsors. And hey, don't skip, because it's important. It's important. That's how we keep the lights on here. So our first sponsor that I want to tell you guys about today, we got a really good one. Mount Athos Performance. All right, guys, I'm going to just roll their ads so you guys can see. I mean, I spent a lot of time on this ad, so don't skip it. It's really good. And they're awesome. You guys should purchase some Mount Athos today. Some protein.
In 1 Timothy 4:8, the Apostle Paul tells us that physical training is indeed valuable for the Christian life. And while physical fitness is not the most important thing in the Christian life, it is still of great importance, particularly for men. Why? Because God has called you to protect and to provide. Men, you are called to be protectors. Therefore, God is calling you to be strong, spiritually, emotionally, and yes, even physically. Physical fitness is also important because God has called you to provide. Your family needs you to live a long, healthy life. So, get strong and stay fit with Mount Athos. They are a Christian fitness company that uses some of the best natural ingredients. So I've personally been using their supplements for 6 months now, and I'll tell you right now, I am not going back. They are my new supplement brand. So stop giving your money to pagan fitness brands that can't even tell the difference between men and women. Join Mount Athos in creating the next generation of health, strength, and spiritual vitality. Visit athosperform.com/reformation. And don't forget to use code REFORMATION for an exclusive discount today. This episode of the Reformation Red Pill podcast is brought to you by the No Other Name Conference. Join the future of Christendom at the No Other Name Conference, October 9th through 11th, 2025 in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Equip yourself with biblical truth to discern cults and counterfeit faiths like Mormonism, Islam, and atheism. Enjoy fellowship with Reformed Christians and hear from men like Jeff Durbin, Joel Saint, and more. Stand firm in Christ's truth. Visit futureofchristendom.org and use code REFORMATION for 10% off your registration. You're not going to want to miss this. All right, guys. We're going to keep going here for just a few minutes. I'm going to watch out for any comments in here. If you got some comments that tell me you want to keep going on the interview, I'll consider it. And last thing, if you guys I see like 450 people watching, most of you guys are on X, please consider going over to YouTube to watch there. This is, we revamped an old YouTube channel to get the daily show going, the Daily Dose. And you guys will help me out a ton if you'll just go watch there and like the video over there. It tells the algorithm to send it out. All right, let's jump right back into Jordan Peterson's distressed-looking face here.
I'd like you to comment on that. I'd also like you to tell me, if you would, what kind of response you got to your New York Times article.
Okay, well, yeah, let me start with that, and then I'll get to the second, the bigger one. Remarkably positive from readers. There is a, one thing that I think is a lot of people miss, especially people who are all in all the time into political fights online, is that there is still a big American center left, center right. There is a big American center.
About 80%.
That has a lot of common concerns. Mm-hmm. And so whereas somebody on Twitter might be talking about toxic masculinity, there's no problem with young men, the future is female, and all of that stuff, there's millions of Democratic moms who have sons who love their sons so much and are worried about their sons. And so when I go back to first principles, rather than immediately diving into gender gaps and political races and all this, instead talk about struggles, you actually meet people where they are. And where millions of moms and dads are right now is I'm having trouble. My son is having trouble, or my son's friends are having trouble. My nephew is having trouble, whatever. That's where millions of people are, and they are hungry for somebody to approach that problem with empathy and approach that problem saying, I see all of this. I see you. I see what is happening. And so I think that's why the response to that article was overwhelmingly positive, certainly into my inbox. Now online, it was much more mixed, but that's an artifact of lots of things that are actually irrelevant to the article. But it was remarkably positive. And Jordan, I'll tell you another story that I think would be encouraging to you. I was in a meeting, one of these meetings, you know, I call them Save the World meetings, where you get a bunch of people into a room and everyone's talking about what's wrong with the culture and what's wrong with everything and what can we do to fix it. And this room was much more left-leaning, much more left-leaning. There was a few conservatives in there. I was in there, a couple other
Shocker.
people. But one thing that was so striking, woman after woman at the meeting stood up and said, we need to be reaching young men, and we need to be telling young men we love them. I'm a mom of boys, and I love my boys, and I do not want this culture telling my boys there's something wrong with them. And
that's the problem there. You know, what a bunch of young men don't need is a bunch of ladies, a bunch of girl bosses reaching out to them and saying, I love you. Oh, I love you. That's not what young men need. Young men need purpose. They need drive. They need a mission, right? And so, yeah, David French is he's the opposite of the Issacharian instinct type of person. For those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, the men of Issachar were the men who understood the times to know what Israel should do. And David French doesn't understand the times, and he doesn't know what America should do at all. Oh man, it's not what we need. You know, I say it all. Like he can come up with some good points and some observations that are mildly surface level helpful, but ultimately he's a lib. That's just all there is to it. He's a lib. He's captured by liberalism, feminism, egalitarianism. That's made clear basically every time he opens his mouth. We'll just keep going.
this was happening in left-leaning spaces, not far left, not like radical left, but in left-leaning spaces. And so I think, and I have seen it with my own eyes, that there is a desperate hunger in America, broad America, for constructive mentoring of young men. Another thing, you may have followed this, but Admiral William McRaven, who was the admiral who headed American Special Forces, directed Operation Neptune Spear, which killed bin Laden. Just a remarkable American man, American story, American role model. He gave a commencement speech at UT Austin several years ago, and it's known as the "Make Up Your Bed" speech. It's a theme that you've articulated as well. Millions and millions and millions of views for that thing. It has been just spread and metastasized all over America, and not just in conservative spaces. And so that's what I think is encouraging. Lots of people in that big American middle are waking up and saying something here is wrong. And that's why the response to the Times article was more positive, I think, than people might expect. The other thing, going to the bigger, deeper question, I get so tired of the concept of the gender wars and the concept, the way our political parties exploit gender gaps. So, the way our political parties come in and say, the Republicans might say, well, we win more with men than with women, so we're going to really dive in with men. Or the Democrats say, we win more with women than men, and they really dive in with women, which means we have these giant engines of cultural and political influence who are exacerbating gender and sex disagreements as part of their political project, right? And so it's creating the sense that, and rather than we're all in this together, and that you cannot have women in America writ large cannot be in a healthy place unless men in America are in a healthy place, and vice versa. So the idea that we're all in this together, that this is not a zero-sum game, I think that's a message that has to be repeated and repeated and repeated, that the success of men does not mean the failure of women, the success of women does not mean the failure of men. And, I don't know that
Yeah, but the thing is, you've got to be able to courageously define what is success and what is failure. Because if for you, success is defined as men and women in the workforce together, 50-50, total equals in every area of life, totally flattening the distinctions between men and women. Well, that's not how I define success. That is a failure. Realistically, success would look like homes full of wives and mothers, right? Wives and mothers who are able to, and not only who are able to, who desire to stay home and take care of children and tend to the needs of the household, right? And this isn't me saying okay, there's no reason whatsoever that a woman should, bring in income or something like that, or have some kind of job. No, we see in Proverbs 31 that she was working under her husband's authority And ultimately, she was buying and selling land, these sort of things. So it's not that that a woman can. There's no place at all whatsoever in the workforce. But the idea that women in general should be pursuing college degrees to go out into the workforce to become an economic contributor, like women shouldn't be seen as GDP points, right? Women should be seen in their primary role that God has given them, which is wife and helper and mother and nurturer. And the fact that I'm saying that out loud, feminists just lit their pink hats on fire and started running around and screeching like that. It's so unpopular just to say what's been so obviously true for so long. And so the thing is David French, he doesn't even have I say he doesn't. I don't want to impute motives, but from everything that I've heard from him, he doesn't have the same conceptualization of success. Yeah, success is not an egalitarian feminist, utopia or dystopia, rather, hellscape. No. Success is men and women leaning into, culturally speaking, success would look like men and women desiring to and successfully leaning into their roles as husbands and fathers and providers and protectors and wives and mothers and nurturers and homemakers and home tenders. And homemaker would no longer be a term of derision as it has become, which is just a total feminist psyop. The fact that we've bought into that lie, that's so insane. So insane. Well, one last call. Please, guys on X, come over on YouTube. It'll help me out a ton, and like the video. All right, let's keep going.
Here's the way I would put, I don't have the same perspective of you about corporate evil and all of that, but I will say this. I do think that one thing that really distresses me is that we see people having fewer kids than they say they want to have, and we see people getting married later than they say they want to get married, or not getting married at all when they say they want to get married. And I think we have this gap between people's desires, the deepest desires and longings of their heart, and their actual lives, what's actually happening in their lives, that is really putting a pall of anxiety and failure and hopelessness over American life. So what is it that we can do to close this gap between your heart's longing and the reality of your life? And by the way, longing for children and longing for a marriage that's not, I don't think everybody, as a Christian who believes in the Bible, it's very plain from Scripture that not everybody has to be married. But if you're somebody married.
No, yeah, that's true. There are some very few who are called to a life of singleness. But this is not the message that we need to hear right now. We need to hear the dominion mandate, the call to be fruitful and multiply, to leave and cleave. That's the message that's needed right now in our feminist world. We don't need that. Oh God, singleness is such a great thing. No, it's actually. Doug Wilson has a great sermon on this about the curse of singleness. I don't think he titles it that, but basically singleness, if you are not called to singleness, it is a burden to bear, right? It's not a blessing. Now, if you are called to singleness, it is a blessing, right? Because you get to focus more on the matters of the kingdom, as the Apostle Paul says. You are not distracted by, the somewhat earthly, and I don't mean worldly, I mean earthy concerns of family and children and that sort of thing. You get to be full on dedicated to Christ and his kingdom in a way that married people aren't. But those people aren't sitting around longing to be married. So for those who are sitting around longing to be married, which is most everyone, for those people, singleness it's a burden to bear, and it's difficult. And yeah, and so there's too many Christian leaders. This is a little bit of a tangent, but there's too many Christian leaders who try to sell it as this blessing for them, but it's not. It's currently a burden for them because they want to be married, as most people do. And that's the message we need to hear is, go get married, have babies, baptize them. That's what we need.
Marriage is a wonderful institution. It's wonderful for me. So saying I want to get married, that's a good thing. Saying I want to have kids, that's a good thing. Yeah. And how can we narrow that gap between the heart's longing and the reality? Honestly, Jordan, I think that's one of the central cultural and political projects of our time, and it's why neither party has been able to win a commanding majority for anything more than a 2 to 4 year period in the last generation. Is that so many millions of Americans feel like their dreams are out of their reach, and they're looking everywhere for a solution to this. And in the political sphere, they're definitely not getting it.
Yeah, so that's true. That's absolutely true. both parties have been progressively moving anti-family, right? Like conservatives are now, conservatives. Republicans, you can't hardly find a Republican who will oppose a Obergefell, right? Which is one of the greatest assaults on the family in modern history. You've got it, but this is just hollow coming from you, man. You supported the candidate who was like pro alphabet cult everything, right? Pro unaliving babies at basically every level of development. Like you can't say that you're the pro family guy and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to support we need pro family in politics. Meanwhile, you have supported quite literally the first time that you voted not for a Republican was the point in history where their platform was more anti-family and radical than they have ever been in their entire life. So just save it. Just, okay. Anyway, that's crazy.
So one of the things I thought when I reached out to you is that since we were concerned about the same issues, that it might be worthwhile sorting out whatever differences we might have, and I don't know how much you know about my work enough to have written about it sometimes, but I'm curious if you have any questions or concerns about what you see that I've been doing, and because I'd like to address them, because
I criticize Jordan Peterson because he's kind of flirting with the Christless conservative. Well, he's a Christless conservative, and he's basically a classical liberal. So I give him a hard time, but he seems like a great man. Like I would love to hang out. I wouldn't want to hang out with David French, but I would like to hang out with Jordan Peterson, talk to him. Just like, here, what are the problems you have with what I teach, what I say, what I've written? That's a humble thing to do, and that's respectable. So Jordan Peterson, good on you.
We don't need the split.
Right. Well, I would put it like this. There are lots of elements of your work that I have really appreciated, and I've really appreciated the impact of your work that I've seen on people I know and people I love, and I have very much appreciated that. I think we probably have some pretty sharp political differences when it comes to how do we manifest, who do we support, and how do we manifest our shared concerns into the political world and into politics. And then I think there are some things that we disagree on that really have nothing at all to do with what we're talking about.
Yeah, you support the most pro unaliving babies, pro LGBT, pro destruction of the family candidate of all time. So yeah, you guys do have some political differences, huh?
I think I wrote in The Atlantic that I was critical of your stance on the Ukraine war, that you're kind of seeing the Russian invasion as at least understandable. I don't think you would say justifiable, but understandable to a certain extent. And then the some of your stances on vaccines, and I know you've talked about some people need to go to prison around their stance around vaccines. And
no, people who lied and deceived the American people and pushed vaccines on it. He's a lib. He's just a lib. Please, if any Christians are still listening to David French, which I don't know if you are, probably not. I think basically his audience is now liberals who want to feel good about themselves, like they'll still from time to time listen to someone on the other side. I think that's his only audience right now is libs, like big libs who are like, no, but we need to hear the other side out. I think that's his audience. I think I don't think any real Christians or conservatives take him seriously at all.
So it's interesting. There's a interesting approach you can take when you have areas of commonality and areas of difference. You can dig into the difference and say, these differences are why we are opponents, or you can dig into the commonalities and you can say these commonalities are why we are friends, but who have differences. And I would really like to see in American politics more of the latter approach on a consistent basis, that rather than saying, hey, we have this overlap, but the differences mean we're fundamentally opposed, say the overlap means that we have a lot of fundamental agreement.
See, yeah, because you want to flee to the center. You don't want to take hard stands. You don't want to represent your positions passionately in the public square. Now I get what he's saying here, right? He's saying, like, can't we just all get along? But the reality is, no, you can't. You just can't. You can't get along with, you fundamentally can't get along with people who are advocating for the total destruction of Western civilization. You can't just get along. Like, those are your enemies. And I mean that in a way, I mean that in the way that Christ has called us to love our enemies. He didn't say have no enemies. That's really important. You can't love your enemies unless you have enemies. And those who oppose Christ and who would mock our Savior and mock our faith and are trying to obliterate, Anglo-Protestant culture, those people are our enemies. and we can love them. We should love them. We should pray for them and oppose them. Okay. But, yeah, this let's just play nice and meet in the middle. It's just, that's uniparty stuff. Like, that's not helpful. No, we don't want an echo in our choices, like in our political choices. We want a choice. Okay, we don't want a uniparty. You know.
But like almost every human being on the planet, we do have differences. And I'm happy to dive into the Ukraine war or to vaccines or any other issue where you think we might have differences. I think that might be helpful for people to hear some of that. But that was, when I have written critically, it's been mainly focused around some of these political choices. And to be honest, they're political choices that are not unique to you at all. These are a lot of the beefs that I have with the change in the Republican Party more broadly. I never thought I would see a day, for example, when the Democrats were more hawkish against Russia than Republicans were, for example. I never saw, this is on me, but I never saw a strong movement, anti-vaccine or vaccine skeptical movement coming out of the Republican Party. That was always a far left, crunchy, Democratic, Marin County progressive thing.
And listen to the way he's talking about that, as if it's totally crazy, as if our institutions, well, he was a part of it, so, as if our institutions didn't completely beclown themselves during the COVID era. I wonder why people are skeptical about vaccines. Maybe it's because you forced millions of Americans to take an untested drug, right? And then there were real side effects. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if he's playing stupid with that. I don't know if he's playing dumb or if he's just so immersed in his leftist, progressive, liberal bubble that he doesn't understand how that comes off, like how unbelievably idiotic that comes off. It's just not. Yeah. Well, I guess whenever you were caught pushing the vaccines and telling everyone to get vaxxed and you shouldn't come to church and you should close your churches down, if you were touting that message, then you just got to stick by your guns, I guess.
And so there are many ways that the Republican Party has departed from my previous views, and I feel like you're more in line with the mainstream Republican Party now than I am.
Shopify powers millions.
Store supplied prison with
my show.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know. I haven't called for anybody to be imprisoned with regard to their stance on vaccines. I'm not very thrilled about the fact that there was force applied when people were making medical choices. I think that was a big mistake. And I think there's the backlash that we see against vaccines is certainly part and parcel of that. With regards to the pesky Russians, well,
would love to see him push David French on that a little bit.
And there was all sorts of reasons for that, not least one of the reasons being that it was very convenient for the military-industrial complex, so to speak, to have a perpetual enemy, and Russia seems to fit that bill quite well. And so it's not like I'm thrilled about the fact that the Russians have been chomping at the bit on the Ukrainian side of the world for the last multiple years. I don't regard Russia as a permanent enemy. China's a different story in all likelihood. I don't think we really need to go either of those places. I mean, they've been beat to death in many ways. You saw with your son's friends that concerned you.
Yeah, and boy, some of my son's friends might be watching this podcast, so I don't want to cast a broad brush and have them think, Dave, what does Mr. French think about what,
Well, you already did that whenever you talked about your son's friends on the podcast. So.
No, I'm very proud of my son.
Yeah.
He has wonderful young men in his life, but I'm talking writ large. I'm talking about his broader peer group, okay?
I wonder if those friends are looking, which one is David French talking? Is he talking about me? Is it you? It's probably you. It's probably you, Jared.
And one thing, there's a couple of things that I saw. Definitely alienization from the academic world. No question. That thing that your son said about I did well for a girl, absolutely saw that with this sort of sense that this sense of this isn't communicating to me, this isn't reaching me. Definitely saw the effects of sort of inhibiting and play. That's another big one. When I was in first grade in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I was born in Alabama, raised in Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, so all across the South. When I was in first grade in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, we had 3 recesses a day. 3 recesses a day. And they were crazy and they were wild. And all growing up, we played tackle football at recess in my elementary school in Stamping Ground, Kentucky. So it was just a different experience growing up. And so much more constrained play, a sense that school wasn't really for them. A loss of the free range childhood. I know you've talked to Jonathan Haidt in the past, but this sort of loss of the broader play-based childhood where kids roam the neighborhood. That's what I did when I was growing up. The number of forts I cut through thick underbrush. I mean, by the time I...
Hey, speaking to a real problem there, the helicopter parenting revolution. I was told about a wonderful article years ago, but this guy who followed these kids, he was one of the first to really do a sociological study on children, and he was following them while they were at play, and there wasn't really any studies of children at play. This is way back, I think it's the 70s or something like that. And he studied them and watched them, and they all, were running all around town and out to the train tracks, basically, or the lake or something like that was the boundary. And then he came back years later when those kids grew up and had kids, and then he went to study their kids, and their kids weren't allowed to leave the front yard. And of course they said, well, yeah. And he asked them, like, what was your favorite parts of your childhood? And it was, of course, roaming out and all these things liberal David French is talking about. And so they were talking about that. And then, well, why don't you let your kids do that? And they say, oh, well, it's a much more dangerous world now. Well, of course, he pulled up statistics that showed like every crime metric had been significantly reduced since then. And what really had increased was our awareness of crime, right? So we just constantly see horrible things in our feed, in our social media feed, that freaks us out and wants us to keep our children, locked in, kept safe or whatever. But what are we depriving our children of, right? What are we depriving our children of? I highly recommend we'll wrap this episode here up in a second, but another guy who is really great on this stuff, just earthy wisdom, how to be a man kind of stuff, is C.R. Wiley. And he's got a great book, and it's not exactly directly addressing, the questions of masculinity, although it is somewhat, but his book, The Household and the War for the Cosmos, highly recommend that. And he's got some great lectures on masculinity and the importance of letting boys be boys and what that looks like. So that's a quick plug for that.
It was like in middle school, I was a master builder of rural fortifications. Like, you would just go and leave and play and come back, and your parents my parents were great. They would make me be home for dinner, and then, what'd you do? And then I would tell them about my adventures, and boom, I'd be out again until, my curfew. And so all of those things have resulted in this sense of the loss of all of that, this sense of growing frustration, this sense of growing recklessness. And then you made this medication point that's I think very important. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. There are a lot of people for whom medication has been important, but I feel like it's been overprescribed at a large scale. And so then you take
methylphenidate is inexcusable. Everything about it is a lie. The original hypothesis, just to be clear about this, is that there were a small subset of children who were neurologically abnormal. And if you put them on a stimulant, which is what methylphenidate is, most common ADHD medication, it's an amphetamine, that paradoxically calmed them down. And the fact that they calmed down was an indication of their neurological abnormality. Okay, every single bit of that is a preposterous lie. What methylphenidate does is increase the probability that you will continue to attend to whatever you happen to be attending to. It locks you on, and it suppresses play behavior. And there's no evidence whatsoever that it has a paradoxical effect on a small subset of children with attention deficit disorder. What it does quite clearly is stop boys from playing roughly, especially the ones that are more extroverted and, more extroverted, more sociable, more assertive, more talkative, all of that, more boisterous. And so I don't think there's any evidence at all in the clinical literature of the medium to long-term utility of attention deficit disorder medication. I don't think there ever has been. Like, I followed that.
Yeah, that's been obvious to a lot of people for a long time. Matt Walsh has done some great reporting on that, actually. Just the total bogus lie of ADHD, and how we're just drugging an entire generation of kids, and the incredible impact that's going to have on them. It's just scary. Yeah, and it, even to do that, from the outset, it assumes that we know we have this like diagnosable baseline of the human personality, and if you deviate from this baseline, that you are now abnormal, right? But which would mean that the scientists, the doctors, that they have a perfect anthropology, right? They understand the human condition exactly as it should be, and to deviate from that is you're disordered or whatever. And so, yeah, which puts a lot more authority, or it gives a lot more authority to people that that don't go to God's word for their anthropology, right? They're purely secular, and yeah, it will have devastating effects. It just will. It will have devastating effects on our children for generations to come. So more people need to be speaking out against that for sure.
Literature since 1982. In fact, the first scrape I had in graduate school was with a professor at McGill who was at the forefront of ADHD research and who was a methylphenidate advocate. And I criticized her papers on grounds of no long-term follow-up. And it's some preposterous percentage of boys now are put on methylphenidate medication. And so
when I was a kid is when it really began starting, because I can remember when some of my peers would start to go on Ritalin.
Yeah.
And that was even back in the day when I'm Gen X. I mean, we were the ultimate free range generation. I was a latchkey kid for a little while. And so you take all of these things, less play, less ability to, the academic environment, less hospitable, less recess, and then there's a lot of downstream consequences of that, and then you say, here's a pill. No, that was not the path. And again, I don't want to overstate this, but I will say that we went too far in that direction, and we've paid, and a lot of well-meaning doctors, a lot of well-meaning parents doing the best they could with the circumstances that they had, fell into this. And it's just been so tragic. And so one of the reasons why I'm such a booster, for example, of Jonathan Haidt's work is that he really wants to get us back to that play-based childhood. And look, everything's trade-offs. It's an interesting irony that the latchkey kid generation became the helicopter parents. The Gen X generation, we were the latchkey kids, and it's my generation that hovers over their kids, and even more than helicopter, the snowplow parent that clears the way. And I think one of the reasons is some of the excesses of the latchkey world were really negative. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff that happened in that total free range environment, but then there was this overcorrection that went all the way to tightly managed play. And not to refer too much to Jonathan, but there's in his book, Coddling American Mind, with my dear friend Greg Lukianoff.
We're already at an hour 25. Let's call it for today. These are going to be daily, Tuesday through Friday. I may end up doing Monday as well. But we'll do some reaction videos. We'll just do some commentary on what's going on in the news and culture, that sort of thing as well. And if you like this, please like it. Please like the video. Go follow on YouTube, The Daily Dose with Joshua Haymes. And of course, a lot of you guys are following me on X, so thank you for that. And yeah, we are also on the podcast platforms. These will just go out on Reformation Red Pill. So we're not going to do a separate YouTube, or I'm sorry, a separate podcast for that. But with that, we will wrap it up. And my hope and prayer for you guys is, that we take what's going on in culture. As I said, we're trying to bring Christian conservative cultural commentary, or we apply the Word of God to the world around us. That's the vision. And so my hope and prayer is that as we examine what's going on, the hot news of the day, whatever it is, that you leave edified, that you leave encouraged, with some practical applications, some people to read, some old dead guys to look up and study, and some practical wisdom to apply to your daily life. So all of that in service of providing you with the tools and weapons to build, defend, and expand the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ. And we'll see you guys on the next one.